Movement is life, and it is well to be able to forget the past and kill the present by continual change. That is a quote by famed author Jules Verne, and I picked that because it perfectly encapsulates the subject of today's video. But I have another quote that explores these themes just as eloquently. That quote is by famed philosopher and poet Peak Tiger Blood Charlie Sheen, who once said, quote, "I have one speed, I have one gear, go," end quote. But let's say you and I take a step back from the philosophical and get into the meat of today's story as we continue our exploration of the Orruk Warclans battle tome from 4th edition. This story they're one of the little battle stories. It's like half a paragraph long, and it's just sort of a narrative teaser to get you ideas about what the faction is like. This particular one is called Hail the Hog, and it's on page 25. The vampiric Duke Brekovich of Karstinia adds a new treasure to his infamous collection of curiosities. A sliver of a nail supposedly of the hoof of the god beast Shattatusk. This catches the attention of the Bloodtoofs, who are infuriated on their porcine idol's behalf. Several grunta stampedes crash through Karstinian Chattel villages before barreling into the vampire's gates. Enchantments woven into the wood singularly fail to repulse the orcs, as do Brekovich's seneschals. In the orcs' rampage, relics of impossible value are trampled. One is the hoof shard. None of the Bloodtoofs notice. That's it. That's the story. And I read that and it made me chuckle real hard. Obviously, we can see how those opening quotes relate. I'm being silly, of course. But in the end, this is such a classic orky story that I had to layer on some pretentiousness just because this story slaps from beginning to end. It's just so fun. And I like this story because it makes a fantastic segue to talk a little bit more about the Bloodtoofs, who are one of the Ironjaw sub-factions that you can theme your army as, but also a chance to talk a little bit about Karstinia, because this is actually a matchup that I did not see coming, but I really, really enjoyed. And so we'll start our little examination of this story with the instigators of the plot, the ones who jump-started this whole affair. See, when Nagash raised his original 3 Primarchs from the old world, Mortarchs from the old world, the original 3 that came over were Neferata, Manfred, and Arkan the Black. 2 of those were awarded with their own little fiefdoms, as it were. Basically, Nagash brought over Neferata and Manfred to bring vampirism in its purest form to this new set of realms. He gave them plots of land, some servants, and basically saying cultivate vampirism all over the place. The soul blight curse must spread. And because Nagash is the full-on god of death magic and not imagination, the lands that he bestowed upon them were called, respectively, Neferatia and Karstinia. And of course, we're going to focus on the latter, because Karstinia is the original domain of Manfred von Karstein. It is his little slice of Shyish that he's rebuilt in his own image. It's essentially the aesthetic that harkens back to the vampire counts of the old world, that kind of Transylvanian vampire with courts and politics, serfs, castles, all of that kind of stuff. If memory serves me, Karstinia is sort of like a thick, dark, wooded area, generally speaking. I know we don't get a ton of descriptions, but I distinctly remember reading at one point it was sort of a thick forest. And somewhere within this region, Duke Brekovich is establishing what seems to be quite a museum, or at least, a private collection that he wants to, brag about a ton. And I, for one, would love to see what else was on those shelves, right? We know Age of Sigmar as a setting has a whole bunch of weird artifacts. We just covered one in the Murky Business story. And a lot of the more powerful ones were put into storm vaults by Sigmar himself. But regardless, this dude claims to have a piece of a god, or at least a god beast. And that is a thing that is technically possible within this setting. The Heart of Cain is an artifact that exists. And in this case, it intertwines with the coverage of the Orruk Warclans because they have a bit of the god beast Shattatusk. Think of this as the the patron deity of boars, hogs, pigs, stuff like that. Now, we actually talked about Shattatusk very briefly early on in the Orc coverage, because they are specifically worshipped, alongside Gorka-Morka, by the Bloodtoofs warclan. Side note here, before they removed the Bone Splitters from this current battle tome, the Bone Splitters actually also revered Shattatusk. They perceived Shattatusk as the sire of all boars, which the Bone Splitters had a bunch of boar boys and stuff like that, and their depiction of Shattatusk was one of a colossal white-furred boar that carried the cold with him. While at the same time, the Bloodtoofs revered him as the original, god of the gore-gruntas. And so their beliefs were not necessarily simpatico, but they also weren't wildly different. But I like the idea, the imagery of the giant white boar that's just wreathed in ice. That's kind of a cool idea. But the Bloodtoofs, I guess, display their reverence for Shattatusk in a very different direction. It's not just the boar as a creature, right? The gore-grunta type thing. It's also just the mental image of the charging, the aggression that lures them in. The Bloodtoofs, in short, are built on speed, right? These are the orcs we mentioned with the red armor because it makes them go faster, and they spend all their time just running through realm gates. We mentioned in a previous video that this war clan is one of the most nomadic amongst all the war clans, because they see wrangling a gore-grunta into service as the cost of entry, of just this is what it means to be an orc for us. Everyone is perpetually moving, and the biggest source of thrill that they have is plunging through realm gates at full speed, not really knowing where it'll lead them. Now, some characters who are looking upon them trying to understand the Bloodtoofs, or at least their patterns for destruction, would look at this and say, okay, they're just running realm to realm looking for Gorka-Morka. That's maybe their logic. More accurately, it's that the Bloodtoofs are running realm to realm looking for the final waw that they hope Gorka-Morka will lead them in. So, sort of there, but they're really looking for a fight. Not so much that they're seeking their patron deity. Truth is, it could just be as simple as they find it fun and everything else is boring, so they just choose to keep on doing this. Regardless, one thing I'm very curious about, and it's not really explained in this story, of course, is how they heard about the artifact. And I thought that could be a compelling story. Like, for example, what if, one night, the closest thing that they have to a shaman within the packs of the Bloodtoofs, has a vision from Gorka-Morka. A fragment of Shattatusk is clutched in a skeletal hand. And then that shaman can be like, hey, we have a heading, right? And now this war clan that's constantly going through realm gates is suddenly in a direction. They're trying to go somewhere, specifically Shyish. I thought that could be a very fun short story if they just had the story of the shaman, his vision, and then this warband that is renowned for not having a particular direction becomes scarier because now they have one. And I like that idea of this vision because the alternative to that is them learning through more traditional means, right? Like, does this Duke of Dingus have a broadcast going that he has just this weird collection of very obscure things? I mean, vampires are pretty vain. He might. But it would be odd for him to have marketing that would somehow make it into orc language and recognition, in my opinion. It could also be a cool, natural phenomenon. Like, for example, the Bloodtoofs are always drawn to where there are more gore-gruntas. Well, what if gore-gruntas are drawn to wherever the Shattatusk artifact is, and so it's a natural consequence? The pigs come to the artifact, and the Bloodtoofs come for the pigs, and then while they're there, they're like, we could just go take that. That'd be kind of fun. Regardless of how they got there, I like this story because I think it's a fantastic setup for a mini campaign, right? And I like doing mini campaigns in standard 3-game arcs, right? The first mission, the orc player is down points. This is the nameless war clan that the Duke is going to take the shard from. The next mission, where the Soulblight Gravelord is defending their walls and the Bloodtoofs surge in, followed by the final climactic battle where, you have both the leader of the Bloodtoofs and the Duke present fighting for the shard, kind of a thing. Obviously, those second and third games are Bloodtoofs heavy, so go hog heavy. And there's tons of room in here for, if you wanted to expand the story and kind of create your own campaign narrative out of it, which I think is the strength of these little half paragraph tales. There's a lot of things that you can fill in. For example, what is the city like? There is a brief allusion to the Duke's seneschals, but what is that? You can make your own, essentially, like, regiment of renown that is the Duke's Guard. It strikes me as the kind of story that would have been a really cool battle report series that we would have seen in, like, early 2000s White Dwarfs, but we don't get that anymore. That's at least my opinion. And again, while the story is as simple as the orcs found out there's an artifact that they want, or more accurately, don't want the vampires to have, and go and try to take it, and in the mess, the fracas rather, the artifact is destroyed and nobody notices. That's really it. That's really not a long story, but the reason I like this and why I think it's cool, transitioning into the end of this video, is that it is the peak of orkiness that defines why this faction is so fun. There is violence. There is a winner. But there is not what you would call a resolution, right? The MacGuffin that prompted this whole thing was lost and destroyed. Their enthusiasm to go punch someone who dared to take a piece of the hog god was more intense than their reverence of the artifact of that same deity. And that, like, I can't stress enough how much I like that. It's not about the thing. It's about you saying you own the thing. You can't own that thing. Not that I want it, but you can't. It's essentially, that's the tenor of the orcs, right? It's not that they need the artifact of Shattatusk. It's how dare this vampire boast about owning it. You can't own that, man. Like, I'm sure if it survived the battle, some orc may have claimed it as a trophy, maybe used it as a nose piercing on their gore-grunta or something like that, right? Just something kind of cool. But again, it's about the journey, not the destination. Now, the other reason I really enjoy this story is that it puts orcs in Shyish, right? Because we don't know anything about the specifics of the city, but we know Karstinia is in Shyish. And I wish we saw more of that. Right when Nagash was about to do the Necroquake at the dawn of the second edition, there was a massive destruction army of all the destruction factions at his gates of Nagashazar. This was something that came about because of the Malign Portent's short stories. Essentially, shamans of the Bone Splitters, Ironjaws, Gloomspite Gits, Maw tribes, and so on were pushing their warbands in that direction. Everyone could feel that something big was happening in Shyish, and so all of these destruction armies just get spit in the direction of Nagashazar. So the first thing Nagash has to do, like when we're reading the Malign Portent short stories, he has Arcane the Black out there trying to basically defend the walls. Now, sadly, that whole army, that siege situation, just kind of dissipated after that arc ended. We don't really get much of a resolution on what happened to the destruction armies outside of Shyish, or outside of Nagashazar, that is. But in that story bit, I found the notion of destruction factions in Shyish interesting, because they want stimulation, right? Whether it's Maw tribes wanting food, orcs or goblins looking for fights and stuff like that, they all want to go from one place to the next, have a good fight, smash and bash a bit, and feel the exhilaration of battle. But to me, Shyish would be like a sensory deprivation chamber for them, right? It's literally still as the grave. It's quiet. The enemies you face, they don't holler and scream back. When you chop into skeletons, they don't bleed. It's just dust. There's no pain. If you kill a night haunt, they just into the air. Meaning, it's not satisfying. And I find that to be compelling when you're talking about destruction armies, because I think about the point of view of the mega boss. We talked about this a bit early on, specifically with the Ironjaws. But like, it's not just their job to keep the warclan moving. It's their job to constantly find fun, satisfying fights that allow the orcs around you to get stronger. Everybody needs to constantly be moving in a direction, upwards and onwards. So, an orc army that can traverse, swaths of Shyish with some semblance of cohesion, to me is very impressive. That speaks to the charisma of the warband leader, of the ability they have to find fights along the way to kind of satiate some of that need. But regardless, it also could just mean that they're all on the same page for something. In this case, giving the finger to a vampire who thinks that they can claim a part of Shattatusk. All in all, I find that to be compelling. Like I said, I want more stories of destruction armies in Shyish. So that's really actually what stood out to this. Like, I mean, as much as I love the idea of just a vampire just totally getting pwned by an orc, it stuck out to me because of Karstinia specifically. I was like, man, how did they get there? Did they have fun? I mean, I'm sure they had fun. They must have had a great time because they had so much fun they destroyed the actual artifact itself. But I think it's a story that, like, they could definitely expand this into a full book, and it would be really cool. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this down below. Personally, I like the idea that even if the artifact survived, they probably wouldn't have valued it as much. Like, I don't think they're going to exalt it and put it on an altar or anything like that. They'll probably just, like I said, use it as a nose piercing, something silly. Because that's what orcs do, and it's awesome. And like I said, it's not about the thing, it's about the vampire saying he has the thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to read them. And tell me what stories you would like to hear next, because I use them as inspiration for future videos. I just have a few more videos left on the Ironjawz book. I want to go back and kind of flesh out some of the more minor stories and details on the Slaves to Darkness and Skaven books. But let me know what you would like to hear from next, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and happy wargaming, friends.